group of cyclists making their way into the village would have been a regular sight in Alrewas as they stopped off on their weekend ride for a cup of tea at Horsley's or Tranter's Cafe, or to get a puncture repaired at Hart's garage. This modern map of Alrewas is very familiar to us now, and we may be forgiven for thinking it's always been like this. However, if we were to go back around 70 years, the layout of the village would have looked very different. Back then, the village was less than half the size it is now and was home to about half the number of people. Alrewas was a small community dotted with farms and lots of wide open spaces where everyone knew everyone else. This aerial photograph taken in 1954 shows large areas of open land, and this land was destined for new houses and became Deepmore Close, Walkfield Road and Churchill Crescent, and Micklehome Drive. This film will cover the period from the 30s to the end of the 1950s, and we'll look at 4 main areas: places, employment, education and recreation. Let's start by having a look at the village itself. Many of the street names we know today have roots going back hundreds of years. Most have stayed the same, but a few have had several changes of name. The top end of Main Street towards the A38 was called Station Road. Wellfield Road was originally Furlong Lane and possibly Oddfellows Hall Road. Park Road was known as the Dock. Furlong Lane was Back Lane and Post Office Road was Post Office Lane, and before that Market Street. Exchange Road was Turnley's Lane after a family of village basket makers, and prior to that it was called Malthouse Lane. William IV Road was known as Old School Road because the houses facing it, in what is now Park Road, were the original village school. The many alleys in the village have names too. A few of them we still use today. The alley from Main Street to Furlong Lane was known as Peg's Alley, Christian's Alley, or in latter years, Bank Alley. The alley from the George and Dragon to Furlong Lane was unsurprisingly called Dragon's Alley, and the alley running between Main Street and Walkfield was Dickinson's Alley, named after the shop that was adjacent to the alley. What we now know as Mays Walk was Mays Alley, and Fairy's Alley was named after Fairy Dolman, who lived nearby. The local name for Dark Lane was the Slang, and the War Memorial Triangle was called the Green. We'll now take a journey from the A38 to Kent's Bridge, looking at the shops that would have been in the village in the 30s, 40s and 50s, and pausing to hear about employment, education and recreation. So join us as we see Alrewas at work, rest and play.
I'll tell you, the Paul Pry was the furthest building away from Alrewas, on the doorstep.
But also at the Paul Pry was the village mortuary. Some kids used to get a bit frightened. Why? I don't know. I really don't know. But they used to say, do you think there's anybody in there?
And then over the road you got Leslie's garage started off.
My father, I know, spent all the money he had got. He started life as a farm labourer. He spent £100 to buy a field in Alrewas. He installed petrol pumps, which was a big thing, because they used to fill cars out of cans. So he had petrol pumps, which of course you turn the handle and got up to 5 gallons. I remember those pumps, and I used to turn the handle years ago. And then of course he he bought very expensive electric pumps, and I think I'm right, they cost £200 each. There's pictures of the first house my father built in the field, which was an ex-army wooden hut, and he had a workshop which was an ex-army wooden hut. So those were the two first buildings on the site. And he built a better garage, bigger and better, of course, before he built a bigger and better house.
And then there was obviously Horsley's calf.
Yes, yeah.
The first one, of course, was on the left-hand side where Leasley's garage is now. There was a shed at the back of that property where the cycling club used to call in.
They were on that corner, and then I don't know whether, I think they died because my father bought the property when they left, and we sort of opened it up into the forecourt and showroom for the garage.
On the opposite side of the road, sadly it has been demolished. There was a little sweet shop.
The opposite side, there was Mr. Hill, the cobbler.
And there was an old man used to mend boots and shoes across the road.
Mr. Hill, Humphrey, sorry, but we always called him Humpy. Do you know, I can still smell that leather. It's strange, because he'd let you go in there when it was cold, as long as you didn't chatter him to death. He was perfectly all right with your company in there.
Next to that was Mr. Hill's the cobbler's. He was a dear little man, and it was lovely. I used to love taking shoes to be repaired there because it smelt so lovely of leather. I could have stood there all day smelling the leather. It was lovely, and watching working the foot paddle, it fascinated me to watch him repair shoes.
Next door to him wasn't Cowlings at the time. I mean, in our day,
yeah.
But that was certainly where the sweetie shop was, and it followed being an ironmonger's, a very, very popular shop and used again by the farming fraternity. There was nothing that Mr. Cowling didn't have.
It was like a chemist shop with all the drawers, wasn't it?
Cowling, he was brilliant, he was.
Oh, he was
fabulous bloke. Terrific.
But it got such a lot of stock, hadn't it?
Yeah.
It'd say, I know I've got some, but I can't just put my hand on it. Come back in an hour and I'll have found it for you.
When we used to go, when we used to be fishing,
What you really
for about a shilling or 1 and 6, you come out of this shop with all the stuff you needed to go fishing with.
Back over the other side was old Ma Taylor's fish and chip
Paddy
shop,
Taylor's,
which is the electrical shop.
Yeah.
She was an amazing woman. She'd got like a little cafe thing at the back with perhaps 3 or 4 tables in the back and a one-armed bandit. And she used to make the pastry and the pies and cook fish and chips. She'd always got a cigarette dangling out the corner of her mouth with a great big ash hanging on it. And we used to be taking bets on whether it would land on the floor or in the fish pan.
Some of the local women worked in there. Old Peggy Clues.
Peggy Clues,
She was there when
she
was
was
a
one.
youngster.
I could never eat 6p of chips. I could eat 4p, but I couldn't eat 6p of chips.
And he's got a good attitude.
And then, of course, there was Mr. Barker's.
They were lovely, Mr. and Mrs. Barker, and you walked in the shop and it was a high mahogany counter and a lovely big bacon slicer at the side, and I could just about see over the top of Mr. Barker's shop counter, and all the sweet jars were all around the top, and they were so friendly and nice.
And next door, there was another little shop, veggie shop, Tommy Green, or whatever his name was.
Well, yeah, and then next door to that was Joe Green's.
Joe
old
Green.
Joe Green.
But you used to go probably in there with our Alan Walker and his mum Auntie May. He used to give us a little slip of paper and a couple of shillings. Just go up to Joe Green's and get me some potatoes, whatever.
Back over the other
The other side
was the doctor's surgery, Dr. Platt. in the house.
And,
Well, just to, like, I suppose it was the
it was
hall.
a little annex off the
Yeah,
house,
yeah.
wasn't it? It was, but that's all it was. It sort of seats around the outside, wasn't it?
Yeah.
To the two walls, whatever, and then you just went in there and he came in.
Yeah.
Jimmy Platt, Dr.
It was like
Platt.
the outdoor of the pub.
Yes, it was actually. Yeah, very much so.
Very keen with the
But
needle.
yeah, you could go there any time, couldn't
Yeah,
you?
any time of day.
Because we didn't have telephones and sort of marched down there.
Hello, and welcome to Archive TV, where we aim to bring the past to the present. My name's Holly Ward. I'm India Hillback, and out on location we have...
Hello everyone, my name is Mia Carmichael.
Thank you, India and Mia. Now on today's show, we're going to be looking at employment in Alrewas in the 1930s, 40s and 50s. That's right, and we can promise you some great stories and lots of interesting and useful information. We'll start with a question. What do you want to do when you leave school, or if you already have? What did you want to do? Over to Mia.
Thank you, India. In 2012, we leave school at 16 or 18. Back in the 1940s, most children in Alrewas left school at 14 or 15. I spoke to some of them about what they did when they left school.
And I first went to work at Miss Helleby's down Mill End. I was at cleaning, because I left when I was 14. I left school when I was 14, and I went cleaning at Miss Helleby's for £0.50 a week. And I left there and went to work at the aerodrome in the canteen, because that was what I wanted to do.
Yeah, I remember my last day at school, and the headmaster, Mr. McNaught, came to me and said, Prince, would you like to be a mechanic? So I said, yeah. He said, well, he said, go down to Mr. Leavesley, he says, at the garage, he said, and see him, he said, I've had a word with him, he said, and I think you'll be all right for the job.
Gerald has a wonderful story to tell about a very special co-worker.
He said, I've got a new mechanic coming, he said, but he's a bit different than what you know, like, you know. So he said, well in what way is he different? He said, well, he says, this fella's got no arms. He said he was born without arms, so he's never missed them. Anyway, he said he's starting, he says, and he said, I'm warning you, like, you know, he says, see how it goes. Anyway, and that's it, and he started, and he was a marvellous man, really. He had one shoe that he used to slip on and off. Just all the back of the heel was all pressed in, like, you know. And his instep above, you know, the upper instep, it was all muscle. And his toes, he could, you'd be surprised what he could do with his toes. He could grip your hand and you wouldn't get away from him, like, you know, he was marvellous, he was. And he used to slip the shoe off, you know, and he could change a set of points on a car, which was them days, like, you know. He could do all that, and he did a lot with his mouth, like, he'd have a screwdriver in his mouth and he'd work it round. And
incredible what that man could do with his toes. You've obviously heard of it, and it was amazing. I've never seen anyone like him in my life. I mean, as a youngster, I don't know whether you know much about mechanics, in the sense that he, with his toes, could put collets in the valves of an engine. Incredible. I couldn't do it with my fingers.
Quite a story. Now back to the studio.
Thanks, Mia. In the 30s, 40s and 50s, most people who lived in Alrewas also worked in Alrewas. In those days, it wasn't so much of a case of will I get a job, but what job will I do? It was much, much easier to get jobs then, and you could walk out of a job one day and start another the next. There were lots of different kinds of jobs, but the three biggest employers were the farms, builders, and of course the mill. We sent Mia out to look at some farms.
Here I am in Main Street, and there's not a farm to be seen, but it wasn't always like that. There used to be lots of farms. Viv Swinfield had a farm here where these houses are. Where the shops are now used to be Turner's farm. This housing development was once barns and outbuildings belonging to Jack Swinfield's farm. Behind this house was Essington Farm. Butcroft was once Houghton's farm. This is now called Manor Fields, but is the site of Manor Farm, one of the last farms to go. This collection of derelict outbuildings was Tom Mellor's farm. As well as these farms, there were also lots of small holdings. It's difficult to believe there was so much open space. Now we go over to Holly to tell us about the mill.
Alrewas Mill stands high above the skyline and is now shut away from the village by electronic gates. The mill has been converted into luxury apartments, but it has a history going back hundreds of years. There are records of there being a mill here since the year 1260.
That's over 750 years ago.
Correct. This was replaced by a new mill when the canals arrived. Over the years, it milled flour and cotton, and in 1818 part of it was burned down. It was after the First World War that the mill had its most successful period, when it was taken over by Egerton Orme and Frank de Ros. Egerton's son, George, still lives in the village, and now tells us how the mill came to be in his family.
He was having a drink at the Paul Pry Hotel, which is long since gone, with his brother-in-law, who was a chap called Wilfred Giroux, and these three men heard it was for rent, thought they'd have a go. And it belonged to Lord Lichfield. The whole premises belonged to Lord Lichfield, and the bottom yard at the mill was the estate timber yard for the Lady Margaret estate.
Jenny Beardsmore has a funny story about her dad who used to work at the mill.
He came home in a terrible state one day. They'd moved all these bags of white flour and a mouse had gone up his overall leg. And he'd panicked a bit, I think, because he'd obviously been tapping himself to try and catch this mouse, and in doing so it had scratched him all over his body, you know. But they finally got it out, so my mother said to him, in future you'll have to tie the bottoms of your trousers up with some string to stop them running up.
Thank you for that, Holly. On to a final report of the day as we investigate the building trade in the village.
As you can see, there were many builders' yards in the village. This was the site of Bannister's yard. In fact, they had two right opposite one another, run by two members of the same family. What was once a chocolate factory used to be Kent's yard. This attractive housing complex was Ward's yard, and the White Hart pub used to be here. We've already seen that this was a farm, but it was also Houghton's Builders. May's Alley, as it was, led down to May's Yard, which was a builder's yard and a coal yard, but has now been converted into housing.
Fascinating stuff, India. Well, that about wraps it up for this edition of Archives TV. We hope you've enjoyed it. So that's goodbye from me, Holly. And goodbye from me. India.
And goodbye from me, Mia, on location in Alrewas.
The main garage in the village was Hart's, so you were the main people.
Yeah.
But Grandad Hart did that much for nothing and didn't care. He didn't want anything really out of life, just to go along.
And then there was Hart's garage, where now the hairdressers is, and the garage at the back for repairing cars. And Mr. Hart and his brother did, and Mrs. Hart worked on the shop counter. And there was 3 pumps on the front for petrol.
But as a concern, it took 8 cars. The garage did, and obviously they always were busy. Except that Hart's really only ever did a night shift, because Grandad Hart never got up very early, and preferred to work into the night. It was sort of, he used to work from about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock until about 3 in the morning, because that's the way he liked to do it.
By Hart's, wasn't it, that
Yeah, she
Mrs.
had
Simpson
that.
had a wool shop there, didn't she?
On the black and white one, next to Arts, which was Arts. I mean,
The roof is still there.
Yeah,
It's sort of a
yeah.
pent roof, tiled roof. Where the dentist is now, formerly, or years ago, it was a general grocer's shop, wasn't it? Run by Mr. and Mrs. Tranter.
That's right. Yeah.
So
Best ice cream going.
Yes, well, Mrs. Tranter had a tea room in the back garden, and it was rather a nice garden, and the cycling clubs used to call on a Sunday and change themselves there, or have cups of tea, or call back on the way after they'd been out cycling all day. She'd keep open and they'd come back there. And yes, she had that for years. It was really quite pretty, the garden that was there,
In fact, we had our wedding reception at the back there. They had a big,
yes.
a long, low wooden building
Did
built
wedding
to
receptions.
do wedding receptions.
At the back.
Yes, then Coates's, of course, has always been here.
As you walked in through the front door, where it is now, there was a big marble slab, white marble slab, immediately on your right. And the window used to slide up and across the back, and a big butcher's block. And then Mother was on the till. Alrewas 5. Our telephone number. Alrewas 5. And you used to have to pick the phone up and tap it and ring the post office and get Mr. Fisher and say, I want to speak to Mr. Leavesley or somebody. And then put you through. And then it went to 205. I can remember when there was straw on the floor. Yeah. We used to shut on Thursdays, because it was Burton Market Day. So it was, Thursday was half day closing in all of us. So Dad used to cut the orders for the vans. But I'd never done anything else. I can remember going that black and white building used to be the slaughterhouse, and I can remember going in there in rompers, brushing the blood with a little brush. I didn't have teddy bears, I had pigs made out of father's vests. Mother used to was a great sewer. They used to hang them up on the towel roller.
Oh, there was a little wooden hut that used to call Mrs. Wright's, that used to sell drapery and, you know, clothes. She used to sell clothes.
Oh, you could get anything at Mrs. Wright's shops, from cotton reels to tape measures to clothes, anything.
You know where Ward's, well, George and Dragon,
Yeah.
and then there's cottage,
Yeah,
well, not
row of
cottages, the
houses,
houses
yeah.
there,
Yeah.
and there's a gateway just at the side of there, and you went round the back
of the black and white.
Oh,
of
that's
that
thatched
black and white
cottage.
cottage.
That's
went round the
the
back
Bailey's
there.
cottage. Yes, I realise. Yeah.
And everywhere was scrubbed.
I mean,
scrubbed.
that was a chippy. Yeah, but
And
it
that
was
was a
all
chip,
cooked
yeah.
on an ordinary gas
It was
stove
lovely.
and an open fire.
Yeah.
All the cooking was done, wasn't
Yeah,
it? There?
it was all absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
You could have a complete meal for £3.
In the 30s, 40s and 50s, All Saints School was in Mill End Lane, just up from the church. It became an outdoor education centre, but is now private housing.
Miss Jones, Miss Jones, Miss. There was two Miss Joneses, one from Fradley and Miss Stokes that married Mr. Constable. They were single when I went to school, but when the boys and Anne went to school, they were married, and they were Mrs. Leasley and Mrs. Constable. Mr. Stubbs, Norman Stubbs, Mr. McKnight.
I liked Mr. Stubbs. He was a lovely teacher, Mr. Stubbs. And I liked Miss Lakin as well. She was my first teacher. When you started school at 5, you went into Miss Lakin's class, and she was a lovely teacher.
And I mean, Mr. Stubbs, he was on the Standard 5, Standard 6 classes. He was, and he used to come down and he used to play football with us as well, like, you know. And we always used to try to rook him up, as we called it, like that. But he was very good. I thought he was a great schoolmaster, was Norman Stubbs.
Mr. McKnight was always very keen on boys learning sport, and particularly cricket in his case. And we would have a cricket match on Wednesday afternoon. But he one day whilst we were playing cricket, he was not paying too much attention after somebody had hit the ball way up towards the church hedge. The boy picked the ball up and went to throw it back to the wicket keeper, misjudged it, and it took Mr. McKnight's pipe clean out of his mouth. Fortunately, didn't break his glasses, because he did wear glasses. But he everywhere went silent. Everyone thought we were in trouble here. But he just turned round to the boy and said, "It's all right, it was an accident."
He was very strict, was Mr. McKnight, very strict, but very fair, very fair. And when we used to get hard freezes, then he used to, because obviously children like sliding on the canal, and you say don't go near the water, but they will. But he always used to go out and test the ice to see whether it was safe to go on. And if it was safe to go on, then he would let you go on, but we used to love it when he tried the ice. We did, because we all had to stay, obviously, the other side of the school wall. And we always used to stand there and wait to see him fall through it. He never did. He wet his foot once, I think.
We used to have these things that you learnt to lace your shoes up. Right. And we were fighting over it, and it got ripped in half. Anyway, she sent us to see Mr. McKnight, and we went out in the passage, and we came back, and we never went to see him. But we came back and supposed to be snivelling a bit and rubbing her hands. We'd never been.
And my first reaction was to look up and try not to cry. And as I looked across to the door into the next classroom, which had got 2 glazed panels, I could see my sister sitting, and she had seen all this happen. So I realised I was in trouble again when I got home at night.
Oh, it was lovely.
It was okay,
happy,
yeah.
Happy
yeah.
school.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, it
very
was,
happy.
yes. In fact,
But there wasn't too much. There wasn't a library, for instance, was there? So,
no, it's fairly basic.
fairly
just,
basic.
Elementary.
Yeah.
I remember disliking it intently.
Yeah.
Thinking I should just go home at dinner time, that was it, me finished on the first day.
Elaine left. Like Elaine, she started school at the Easter, and my dad said, she said she didn't like it, and my dad said to her, "Oh well, my daughter, you've got a nice long holiday now." "I have, Grandad, because I've left."
I can't remember anybody ever taking me to school. We weren't that far away in Mill End, but not like today where everybody piles up with a car and everything. And it was just lovely. And our first teacher was Mrs. Lakin, and it was lovely. It was like being with your mum, really, because she just let you. Well, she didn't let you do what you wanted, but she was very kind.
That was another experience of childhood and school, because in those days, of course, you had annual checkups, a school dentist, okay. The surgery was held in the village hall.
And this was quite terrifying, I found, because you were sent down from the school, you walked all the way down Main Street, wondering what the dentist was going to do when you got there, and then sat in the main hall on a few chairs, waiting for your call.
I was terrified, and the smell from the ether or whatever it was they used, I mean, I just passed out.
He'd had some sort of war experience in the First World War, which gave him the shakes, and we called him Shaky. And to have the mirror rattling around your teeth at the time it didn't give you much confidence, you know.
So from then on, for a good many years, I feared going to the dentist until my teeth started to deteriorate, and I thought, well, it's time I paid attention to this, otherwise I shall have no teeth.
But he seemed to manage the job somehow, and then the walk back up Main Street was obviously more pleasant than walking down it.
When I was very young, there was a lady in the village called Miss Hunter, who was a farmer's daughter, and she wanted to start a school. And she started it in this room. It was a little private school with a one teacher called Miss Hunter, and she's quite a character. And there were the Duros children, there were 2 children there were the kids in the village, there were 2 of the kids' family. There were the Myrtles, there were 2 there was a girl and boy. There was only a few pupils, if you like, and she started a little village school in this room. There was a piano, and I couldn't play truant, it was no use at all. And she started a school here, and then she obviously did a little bit better, and it got bigger and got more children, and she then transferred, because this wasn't big enough, she transferred, I think it's where, down by Salters Bridge there, and she moved to a slightly bigger school there, and then it got bigger still, and she went to Winster at Burton.
When I first started school, I think I was about 4, and Diane from the post office and myself started together in Miss Hunter's school, which is now the home of Dr. Siegel. It was quite nice. It was a nice little school. Everybody obviously knew each other because it was very small. But we had to always wear a blue overall. Even the boys had this blue overall, and we can always remember the village children used to say it was the school where the boys wore dresses. Anyway, and we had to have our own cutlery, with our name engraved on it, a fork, knife and spoon, and a serviette with your name on it as well, and a serviette ring. Diane and myself, we were, being born and bred in the village, we knew everybody, including the dustbin men, who were local people that just worked on the bins, really nice. And in the evening after school, all the farmers' mums, the farmers' wives used to come and collect the children in the cars. But Diane and I used to have to walk it to school and back, and we always used to have a lift on bin day in the bin lorry, and our mum and dad used to go mad.
Very much concentrating on the 3 R's and a lot of general knowledge. So you would be given things to write, essay, not call it essays, stories, whatever. Arithmetic, mathematics was sort of, from what I can remember, sort of everything concentrating on the 3 R's.
Well, everything. We had, what do we have in the morning? Scripture? No, it was arithmetic, not maths, arithmetic. And then perhaps we'd go down the canal side to the field and play on where the vicarage is built.
But it was just lovely, a lovely little school, and everybody look out for everyone else. A bit like it is now, I suppose. I think village people are kind, aren't they?
Walk along towing path. Once I went for a walk along the towing path by the canal. It was a nice sunny day, and the water was still. The towing path is for people and horses that pull the barges to walk along. I could see little fishes swimming about. Just where the river goes over the plank, I saw a heron fishing. There were some swans lower down. On the way, I stopped and watched a man fishing for a little time. Just as I was under the cow bridge, I heard a noise like an engine, and round the corner came a motorboat, towing another boat behind it. They were both loaded with coal and tins of tar. There were some water hens swimming on the water and running about on the field. I was walking quietly along and heard a rustle in the rushes, and out came a water rat. It swam across the water and went into the rushes on the other side.
Where Pear Tree Cottage is now, that was the pharmacy.
I tell you what she used to do. She used to have Angora rabbits. Pluck them and make Angora jumpers.
Go just round the corner, of course, the post office as it is now, and then just past there was a little grocer's shop, and Mr. and Mrs. Williams kept that.
That was Mrs. Rowley's.
Yep.
Mrs. Rowley.
Mrs. Rowley.
I bought my brother, I saved up my pocket money to
I know what
buy
you're
him
gonna
some
say.
lead soldiers.
Britain's lead soldiers on a cardboard, piece of cardboard, about 6 of them.
For
I
a
think.
Christmas present, I think I was about 8. She
Oh,
used to
right.
sell Meccano sets.
Yes.
Things like that. It was
yeah.
quite an interesting shop, really.
Where you live, there was a field. It was a field, and it belonged to Audley Mallover, because he lived in the big house round the corner.
There was, I don't know how much stuff in that yard, wasn't it?
Oh, there was
It
everything.
Everything you could think of, derelict cranes and all sort of boat. Eddie Hobson's was, as you went up the bridge from Post Office Road, his was the one on the left that's been up for sale for about 3 years. He lived there. And then the shed he used, the annex at the side, is where he had the paper. I used to go there and order aircraft books off him.
was put by penny bangers from Dickinson's shop, dropped them in the canal, and they exploded under the bridge and made of an echo. But one night, P.C. Stone put his hand on her shoulders, gave us a right telling off, and threatened to tell her parents. We didn't do it again.
But we used to dare each other to walk along the rail to see how far you could get across. If you were king of the castle if you could get from the mill stream across the whole job lot and come off at the end on the other side on the Trent, you know. I never got that far. But I did have a go. But unfortunately I did it in my new Witt shoes. And off I went and landed in the water.
We often, during the summer months, or at least the apple picking months, knew where trees overhung hedges into the fields that we walked through. One of our gang decided there were no windfalls, someone else had beaten us to it, and decided to make some with a brick that didn't hit the tree, went straight through and landed in a greenhouse.
Went to choir practice, used to get a piece of cotton and tie it to somebody's door knocker in Main Street, rattle it. When they come to the door, we used to run like hell up the village out of the way.
The first thing you need is a group of friends, and a can, and someone to be it. It puts the can on the ground and kicks it. While it is fetching the can back, everyone else hides. It now has to find everyone. If he spots you, he must have his foot on the can. If you're spotted, you must go to prison. If someone who's not yet been caught manages to sneak up and kick the can, everyone escapes and rehides. The game is over when everyone has been caught.
I mean, we used to have games at school again where you'd have two teams, and again, I don't know what it was called, but you'd have two teams, and one team would form like with one person standing against the wall of the playground, and then the others would form like a crocodile behind them, sort of hunchbacks. So they're perhaps half a dozen to the team. Then the others, the object was to leapfrog onto them, try and get up and to try and get all your team on their backs, or at the same time make them collapse while you was landing, and then you'd switch over and do it again, and you know until and the idea was the team that collapsed was the loser.
And then we were down the fields, and we were walking around looking through the hedgerows and what have you, like, you know. And we saw this rosewood, you know, it's the old dog rose, I think they call it, like, you know, and there was the long, thick ones about an inch diameter, thorns all the way up, you see. And we'd cut them off at the bottom, sometimes a bit dicey, like, you know, getting hooked up ourselves and what have you. Break all the thorns off and make a bow out of that. We'd bend it, you know, and put the string across. And they were far better than willow, And for the arrows, well, myself, I used to use Michaelmas daisy stems, because they were pretty light, see, and they were nearly always straight. I used to get a nail and cut the head off a nail, you see, and push it up the bottom as far as it would go and bind it. We were always careful with them, whenever, you know, tried anything there, we always had targets to aim at. And that extra little bit of metal at the one end give that bit of weight to the arrows, and that they really went.
Start of it all, grandmother and grandfather one Christmas bought Jeff and I some real bow and arrows from Redmayne and Todd in Burton-on-Trent. This one particular occasion we were standing approximately in the middle of the field, wasn't it? And I let go with the arrow towards the houses in that direction, but not aiming at anything specifically. But what I think or thought was a bird, actually a sparrow, but it wasn't. It was a piece of brick, a house brick, whatever. and unfortunately the arrow hit the brick and it shied off that at an angle straight up towards our house. It hit the top rail of the fence going into the field from our house.
And then the old man's shed.
Then the shed, and from the shed it caught the
Straight through the
apex
window.
of the brick shed, the brick building,
Oh,
didn't
yeah, I
it?
forgot about that
Then
one.
straight in line with that as well, unfortunately, was the landing window, frosted glass. And at the time, I'd let the arrow go, and before, till we got back to the house, we hadn't got a clue where the arrow had gone, and we were looking everywhere for this arrow, and then all of a sudden, somebody said, "Oh dear, I think I can see it," and there it was hanging in the window. It actually pierced the glass, but didn't break it at all. It just made a
frosted
nice,
glass, wasn't
neat little hole. That's right, yeah.
The old
It,
pictures.
well, it was a village hall. Well, it wasn't a village hall then. It was Oddfellows Hall.
Yes.
And we used to have all sorts of dances and things there.
Yeah.
And the Clifton cinemas used to come round, all in a big van.
They used to whiz around, sticking all the chairs out in the rows, and then put all their gear up. They didn't put the gear up first and then put the chairs out. They put the chairs out first and then put the gear out. And they used to do a showing early on. I think it was from about 5 o'clock till 7. And then they used to show again from 7 o'clock till about 9, 9:30. So you went to the second house if you went to the 7 o'clock thing. And it used to be 9p and 1 and 6p, I think.
I think that was the first time I saw a full-length film. And it's one with, it was called The Day the Earth Stood Still.
They were nearly all cowboy films.
I can remember the cowboy films. We used to watch Hopalong Cassidy and all that, like, you know, and all the kids will be shouting, you know, will be shouting at the Red Indians. I remember because over the top at the village hall on the front there was like a semicircular window. It's been bricked up now, like. But of course it was blacked out. It used to be blacked out on light nights. But there was a bit of a tear in the blackout, and you used to get a shaft of light. You know, right in the middle of the screen, like, you know.
Yes, it was called Song of the South, I think. I remember seeing that when I was little, and it made a big impression on me. Because it was all that zippity-doo-dah, you know. I loved it.
We went in the village. We used to swim along by the quarter-mile bridge and the canal, also in Walkfield and in the River Trent down Staffold Lane.
Yeah. Used to go swimming down the river.
Yes.
Swimming in the canal.
In the river, you used to do it where you got the Millstream Bridge, and then you got the River Bridge.
Yeah.
That was a wooden one when we were up to, I don't know. We used to just jump off that.
Yeah.
I used to also jump off the floodgates outside that was by the Millstream and the mill. Oh, we used to call them floodgates,
Yeah,
so it's sluice gates.
I
used to have to run and jump off the end of that, and nobody could ever reach the bottom there.
No.
You could never reach the bottom because the water used to come off, and it'd only be that deep when it was coming in through the sluices, and then you see it down and it just turn and turn, and nobody could ever reach the bottom. They used to say, if you ever reach the bottom, you'd stay there.
Because it was Barry Hart that taught me to swim in the river. And his dad used to fix the inner tubes up that were really beyond going back into anybody's ties. They got more patches and they got rubber on it, really. He used to fix those up for the kids, you know, and blow them up, and we used to take them down to the river and use them to swim.
You'd go across the fields to the shallows, because I remember getting pushed in there and I couldn't swim, and I went in and I was up to you, sort of thing, and I managed to get out, like, but that put me off going to the shallows. You know, so one of the big lads had pushed me in.
I mean, I can remember going. I remember going to the show on a regular basis. That was, you know, and that was held. If I remember rightly, that was up the Croxall Road somewhere in those days, and it always used to be. I think it used to be sort of September time, and it always used to rain.
Big one day show as well.
We used to have Harvey Smith and everyone.
I used to go to Bakewell show, which in those days was the biggest one day show in the country. But Alrewas was a very big show.
Yeah.
Mind you, there again, I think the reason why it was to a certain extent is because of Alrewas Mills being such a big mill in those days as well.
Yeah.
And that attracted a lot of farmers from miles.
But when I was young, it used to be where the Arboretum is, every year, there. It was called the Speller Jack. Don't know why. Just called the Speller Jack, that area was. And it was a good show. All the farmers used to turn up, and they used to park their cars up against the bales that went all around the ring. And it was a very big social thing. There was no this silly health and safety. Everybody used to there, and they'd lift their boot up, and they'd have the hampers there, and families would meet.
It was cheaper to go in after 5 o'clock, and that was when we had to go, after 5 o'clock.
Crikey, there's still stuff going on at
Oh yes.
Crikey.
Oh yes, the fair was at night then.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of horses, cattle, sheep. And then there was the villagers used to have their horticulture. Biggest run of bean and biggest onions, and yeah, it was very big in those days. Keen, it was keen because it fitted in with everybody's lifestyle.
I remember it being a walk field because when I was in the Cubs, it was all run obviously from the Dragon. We used to go and clean the next day, clean the field up. Then we used to go back, and Marge used to give us some all gold dark chocolate, which nobody liked.
My dad had a very large vegetable garden, and he used to grow everything. And when it was time for the Alrewas show, weeks before, there was preparation for showing, you know, sort of all his onions and his beans. And as we said, like, you know, we used to measure the beans, and they had to be wrapped in paper to keep them straight. And the onions used to be massive, absolutely massive they were. And we used to have to polish, I did it as a kid, polish these onion skins with egg white to make them shiny, so that they look good on the plate for exhibition, you know.
I had to put my handwriting in the show, the school.
We used to go and collect bunches of wildflowers.
I was just going to say, you could put anything in, anything
A
at all
display
in the
of
school.
wildflowers.
In the school one. Tent.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, we could put anything in. A little miniature garden.
Yeah.
On a tin tray or anything.
On anything. And the old co-op had a funny smell. It was, I suppose they had things in bags in those days, so it was a musty sort of smell, and they had a bacon slicer which fascinated everyone.
It was up the main street.
Yeah, right up
where
the
the
main
Rainbow
street,
shop
yeah.
is now.
Yeah.
That was the co-op.
Was that there when you were children?
That was where I used to go for my mum. Yes, to shop.
Mr. Hickson and his two daughters used to run
That's
that, didn't
right,
they?
Ruby
And Tom Smith?
Ruby and Pearl.
Yes, that's right, yes. Yes, Mrs. Dickinson. It was Mrs. Ayres when we were at school. Their mother used to keep it as a sweet shop, and then Mrs. Dickinson took it over. And she extended it and sold fancy goods in another part.
When you used to go in very early, it was all little drawers, wooden drawers, and she'd pull the drawer out with a wooden knob on and pull the drawers out, wouldn't she, all at the back.
Elaine's mum, Anne, used to make us take Elaine out on her reins, apparently to give Chris more responsibility at looking after his little sister. But of course all we were interested in was getting some sweets and going playing football. So the one day
I've always been
we went to get the
sported, you know,
sweets,
always.
tied her up to the chewing gum machine, so with sweets at Dickinson's, tied her up to the chewing gum machine, came out, forgot all about her and just went and played football. And from then on, I heard 2 hours later someone told your mum you were tied to the machine still.
Bill, he actually...
Yeah, Bill had 4 jobs.
Because the fish and chip man with Bet, his wife.
That's, yeah.
Bet. She was a very hard working woman, wasn't she?
She was, yeah.
And then they ran the fish and chip shop.
His official
he was the
job
bookie, wasn't he?
Yeah.
The local bookie. He worked for the South Staffs Water.
That was his official
right,
job.
And he used to do the haircuts as well for men.
This is the old blacksmith shop that was out by Mr. Bradford. He used to be shoeing the horses during the war. I was a member of the farmers bringing them, and you could see them being shod from the road. And Mr. Bradford made all ironmongery and other things that were required for the building trade, as well as the farming industry, sharpening instruments. We could always tell when the blacksmith was in residence because the smoke would be billowing out of the chimney from the hearth.
Alrewas is a rich and diverse community, with born and bred locals and those who've chosen to make it their adopted home, living, working and playing side by side. To understand where we are now, and indeed where the future of the village lies, it's vital to understand where we've come from. And so, Alrewas Archives has been created, with the aims of preserving the past, celebrating the present and leaving something for coming generations. This is the start of an exciting journey, and we look forward to our next adventure.